Hello and welcome to this interview with the amazing Adele Parks. I'm Harriet Minter, journalist, broadcaster, and unashamed Adele Parks fan. And I'm very excited to be interviewing the author of, I think, my new favourite book, and certainly the one that has had me gripped for the past 48 hours. It is the lovely Adele Parks. Hello, Adele.
Hello, Harriet. How lovely to see you. Well, at least speak to you.
Please speak to you. I feel like in the past year we've all got so good at any kind of virtual meeting, interviewing, that when we're allowed to see each other in person again, it's going to be a bit weird.
It is exciting, though, isn't it? As
I'm
we're
so
starting to
excited.
thaw and yes, and see one another. Mm.
I'm really excited also because your new book, both of you, is actually, I think, the first book I've read that is set with a coronavirus lockdown background. Did you decide it had to happen like that? Or did the kind of premise for the book come from everything that was going on externally as well?
No, I'd actually had the premise of the book for a
Mhm.
long time in advance. We can talk about my process, but generally speaking, I have about 3 months where I'm planning a novel, and I'm very careful to think of the dead ends of what could go wrong in that plot. And, is it robust enough to be a novel, or actually is it a
Mhm.
novella, or just a short story? And in those 3 months, I also investigate characters. We can talk about that some more too. I'd actually started writing this novel when lockdown happened. And I had come across, despite my 3 months planning, a little problem with my plotting. And I was thinking, well, why wouldn't they find that out? And then I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, I've been gifted something with with the lockdown, which is extraordinary because actually, it was a pain on so many levels for every single person on the planet. But for me, it did give a little help for the plot, that we were all incredibly isolated very suddenly
Mhm.
in a way none of us could have anticipated. So the plot is about two women who both go missing within a sort of week of each other from London. They have very dissimilar lives. One's a stepmom who works. She's a kind of woman that, I think many of us relate to. If she's not screaming, "Have you done your homework? Where is your PE kit?" She's worrying about whether her phone's fully charged and if her boss is yelling at her. So I think we can all kind of relate to Lee quite well.
Yeah.
And she just goes off to work one day and doesn't come home. And then we have Kai, who, whilst she only lives a few miles away, which is the way in London, you can be cheek to jowl with people of very different
Mhm.
experiences. And she lives in a penthouse with her slightly younger, very sexy, very handsome, wonderful to write husband. And her kind of appointments are generally sort of manicures and pedicures and talking to the chef that's going to come and cater for her dinner party. With the exception, actually, she does care for her mother, who very sadly has Alzheimer's. But on the whole, light years away. But she also goes to an appointment and just goes missing. So at some level, these
Mm.
people oughtn't to be connected at all. But they, the DC in charge of the case feels they are. The coronavirus and lockdown sort of background helped me, because when I talked to the police around that time, they told me a really interesting thing, that sort of a lot of their resources and training just pre-lockdown suddenly went into sort of emergency measure. What if we all looted? What if we rioted?
Mhm.
What if we insisted we wouldn't stay at home? Now, as it happens, we're all very British and, you know, built communities and shared marmalade, homemade marmalade with our local neighbours, which and built WhatsApp groups and swapped books. It was terrific, as it happens, in terms of community. But they didn't know that was going to happen. And so my DC in the book is up against a really extraordinary, unprecedented ticking clock, because she knows once we're locked down, these missing women, there's very little chance they'll be found, because everybody is so isolated. Any lead she has will go absolutely cold.
There was a real sense of time and urgency I felt in this book. I really picked up on that. It has to happen now. It has to be solved. We have to get to the end of it. Um, and I wondered, when you were writing it, I know that you have, and I will ask you to tell everyone about it because it's just brilliant. But I know you have a very structured writing process and you have clear deadlines and timelines. But I wondered if that shifted at all for you in lockdown, and whether you felt either a sense of urgency to get this book written or a kind of difficulty in writing it because of the strange circumstances we all found ourselves in.
Yes, I tend to write, once I am writing after that big long planning process,
Mhm.
I tend to write 1 to 2,000 words a day, right up until I'm sort of at 80 or 90,000 words. And to give context, my books are usually about 100 to 110,000 words. So I have a good old run at it. And I like that. I like to see the word count go up. It's a huge confidence boost. Of course, some days the word count goes down because I suddenly edit, think, that wasn't quite right. But on the whole, I push on. I don't allow myself to stall. And if anything, during lockdown, which I think I speak universally here,
Yeah.
it was frustrating. Anything, writing became my crutch. I absolutely loved having that structure of thinking, okay, I know what I do. I sit at my desk and I write 1 to 2,000 words. I've always done that. Nobody can take that away from me. And so I wrote quite quickly and with quite a level of determination. There were no days off when I was popping into London and meeting other authors, meeting my editor, living, because at least one day a week in pre COVID times, I lived that glam life that we all
The
hope we will
author
live.
dream.
Exactly. I did it. I did. So I would pop into London, and whether that would be to do a little bit of research in a gallery or a museum, or to literally sit in a cafe to sort of soak up somebody else's conversation, or as I say to me, author friends or journalists, or, as I say, my own publishing house. That had gone. So immediately I'd got sort of 20% extra time that I hadn't been aware I was flitting anyhow. I'd kind of not told myself that my 2,000 words weren't being written on those days. So I found that actually I ploughed through it quite quickly. And normally by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had done my 2,000 words. And then my husband, who also works from home, which is a hilarious sentence to have now, because of course nearly everybody works from home now, but he and I, we would go off and have a great big long walk. And when I say long walk, I mean sort of,
Mm.
if we could, sort of up to 6 miles a day. That this from somebody who was happy with a little stroll. And then I would, until lockdown, and I would need to have that yomp, that sense of space. And it's a circular route, and it's sort of I live in Surrey, so you can leave my house, cut across a golf course, and be on the Surrey Hills, which is absolutely utterly spoiling and delightful. And that's what I did. In fact, my Instagram is full of endless, slightly exhausting pictures of Jim and I just sort of taking selfies. So here we are. Yes, we're in front of a hill. But
In a
there was a
succession of
structure.
fabulous hats, I thought.
Yes, I did have many, many hats for the occasion, especially as winter came on. But it was a great sense of, I think I was incredibly lucky compared to so many people. Through lockdown, I did have the ability to concentrate on my work, and so many of us were suddenly sent home from offices and don't have an office set up at home. So I heard stories of obviously people working from their kitchen tables alongside their husbands and perhaps a child or two that are homeschooling. Absolutely horrific conditions. I did hear of somebody who set up their ironing board in desperation and used that as a desk.
Yeah.
I think I've been incredibly lucky. And so I felt a sense of responsibility to get this book out because there was no way I had an excuse. Um, but I also really enjoyed having that structure and that stability.
I love that acknowledgement actually that actually we all needed a bit of structure and stability during this lockdown period. And that I guess kind of leads me into talking a bit about the book itself because I wanted to ask you about the structure of the book because for people who read it, you will see that it's written from lots of different characters' points of view. Was that hard to do?
I think it's going to be very hard for the actor who's doing all the voices. Bless her heart, she is going to be a talented woman. Um, but I very much enjoy doing a multiple viewpoint.
Mm,
I think one of the things that's incredibly interesting about reading and writing is it does stretch our sense of empathy and allow us to really understand that whilst we are, as we're often talking about, and there's quite a lot of memes about, whilst
mm.
we are the heroine of our own world, and whilst we are the center of our own world, it is a big world and there are a lot of people
Yeah.
at the center of their own world, you know. So it's very helpful if we can be empathetic. And I think one of the ways to achieve that is certainly reading and as a writer, certainly offering different viewpoints because you know none of us know everything all the time.
Mhm.
And in a thriller, that's also an incredibly exciting device because in this particular case, we have the two women that go missing, we have their husbands that fall under suspicion, we have the DC, we have the children, the best friends. So we have a lot of people that think they know something about this case, but in fact, nobody knows everything about the case. And isn't that just life? You know, we all think we might know something about somebody, but then maybe we can be blindsided by finding a new piece of information. And sometimes that's a bit of fun information. You know, when you discover a colleague of yours is in a band and plays the drums, and you think you are the most unlikely person to play the drums, or you discover a colleague has a knitting group and goes to the South Bank and knits with friends while listening to classical music, which once happened to me with a colleague, and she was a really young, very vibrant woman, and it just blew my mind and excited me enormously that people have these lives that we're not quite sure of and quite aware of. And I think that's what I wanted to talk about in this novel. And the structure was incredibly complex. I mean, we're being very, very careful to talk around the fact that about a third of the way into this book, there is an incredibly enormous revelation
Yes.
that makes, yes, that makes the reader or the listener look at everything completely differently and reassess everything they think they've known, everybody, the view they've had on all the characters, and that structure was almost impossible to write. I can't tell you the times I sort of sat there and thought, yes, but that person's there and that one isn't, and that one knows that. But how did they find out? And I know they know, but they're not saying they know. And this person's pretending they know, but they don't. And so on. You know, there was a lot to be hidden. But I think that's the intellectual challenge of thrillers. I have written in several genres, but I think the one that's most exciting for me as a writer is definitely thrillers because you do have to not I don't want to trick or mislead my reader, but I definitely want to entertain and deliver up a very authentic and convincing but twisty turny hard to solve
Mm.
novel, which is tricky.
Well, you do that in spades here. It's
Oh good.
absolutely I mean, I loved the thing that I loved about all the different character viewpoint was that just as you thought you knew what was going on, another character came in and gave you a completely different view on it, and you went, "Oh, no, I missed that. What was I thinking?" Um, I really
But
enjoyed.
indeed, you didn't miss it because you wouldn't have missed it. It's just the way life works, isn't it?
Yeah.
I quite often get told, "Oh gosh, your books have got quite a slow build," and I always say, "Well, that's because quite often when we meet people, we get to know a little bit about them, and then suddenly there will be that drunken night in a bar where they suddenly tell you their entire life, and it goes at a speed, and you realise you were missing all sorts of gaps in your knowledge." In fact, this book I think is one of my most pacey. I
Yeah.
literally try to address that thing that people ask of me and say, "Oh, it's quite slow to get into." I think one of the thing that does crop up, and I think will still occur in this book, I quite often get told, "Oh, I didn't like your character," and I say, "I know you weren't supposed to. She's
Yeah.
terrible." I quite like a mischievous or unreliable or difficult hero of the book. And I like that because I think, on the whole, the vast majority of us are relatively lovely and we try quite hard to be very nice people. So I think we understand good people, we understand nice people, but the outliers, the people that do extreme things that are domestically ambitious, by which I mean relatively adulterous. But so many of my characters do that sort of thing, and they do the things that most of us fleetingly think about, but think, "Gosh, no, I'd never do that. That would destroy everything." But actually, my characters think, "Well, let's see what happens." In fact, I don't think they even think, "Let's see what happens." I think they just charge ahead, and we as readers think, "Let's see what happens." And I think that's part of the joy of the book. Even whilst not enjoying the person, you are enjoying the actions of that person.
Well, there's a really interesting bit towards the end of the book where one of the characters is explaining their motivation for what they've done. and sort of trying to explain their motivation for what they've done. And it's really fascinating reading it because it's the thing that we all do when we've done something that perhaps we think we possibly shouldn't have done, but but we
Mm.
did it anyway. And then we try and justify it. So we come up with
Yes.
all of the reasons and all of the backstory. So I want to know from you, how much of your character's backstory do you know when you start writing them?
Pretty much all of it.
No.
So yeah, so the self-justification or
Mm,
self-delusion
yeah.
is a huge part of human nature, I believe,
Yeah.
and I don't think we should be too harsh on ourselves for that.
No.
I think it's quite a good thing to look at yourself and be aware of yourself. And I try personally very very hard to admit to my many faults. It would be quite hard in my home to be self-deluded because they're often pointed out to me as well. But I think to understand a character, you do need to understand how they are self-deluding. And in particular, I have a little technique whereby I interview my characters before I start the process. So in this book, there were 5 or 6, say, main characters. With each of them, I have a little document which starts off with obvious things such as age and gender, marital status, things that you obviously need before you start a book. And so you can say, oh, it's a 40 something woman. She's married with 2 stepchildren. You need that before you can put one word on the page. But more than that, say, for example, if I'm investigating Lee, who's that person who is the working mum, I will also want to know, does she have siblings? If she does she have a favourite sibling? Was she the favoured child? Can she remember her first kiss? What effect did it have on her? What's her birth sign? Does she believe in birth signs? And if it's her birth sign during my book, are we going to celebrate her birthday? If she has a particular birth sign, are we reflecting those characteristics? Because even if I don't believe in that sort of thing, other
Mm,
people might. So, this density that I build with my characters, because that is part of the 3 month planning process, and I build a really in depth profile on all my characters so that I'm very confident about their actions. And so, if in my head they tell me they're deciding to go to the shops, I will know why they're going to the shops and be able to give that excuse immediately. I will know why they feel insecure about an outfit or walking into a room. I will know their greatest moments of shame and their greatest moments of triumph. And whilst all those words may not make it onto the page, or in this case, into the recording, thank goodness they don't, because it would be a very, very dull novel, it actually gives me a personal confidence that I know I can get my character out of any situation because I know them so well. And that is how I feel about, real life people. If you know somebody very, very well, you can understand why they make their mistakes.
mhm.
You can choose whether you're going to forgive or not forgive those mistakes. But generally speaking, if we try, we can understand why other people make mistakes and why we make mistakes ourselves.
There's one question I really wanted to ask you about your character development, actually, which was about naming characters. Because
Mm.
in this book, I thought that every character was brilliantly named. and, and
Oh,
I
thank
almost got
you.
a sense of them from their name. And I
Brilliant.
didn't know whether that was just me putting my own personal opinions of those names onto the people. But I wondered how you go about deciding on the names of your characters.
I do give it a lot of thought. Both first names and even surnames quite often give away something for me. I know this sounds absolutely ludicrous, but it used to be a real joy I got out of as a child reading Charles Dickens, thinking, that's a clue, that's a clue, that's the sort of person this is going to be. If you think of Oliver Twist, his life twists, it's a pivot,
Yeah.
he has pivotal moments. And I remember sort of working all that kind of thing out. And obviously, there are significantly more obvious names in all of Charles Dickens' works that we can understand where his characters are going to go. So I've always had a little bit of fun. I mean, one of the very first things I do, if my character is supposed to be 43 years old, I go and look on the birth registry. What were the names that were registered 43 years ago? What were the most popular names? So I give a context to the person one of the characters, for instance, she's called Fiona. She is in her 40s. That's
Mhm.
a very sort of that time name.
Yeah.
Probably not many people are called Fiona at age 2 or 3 right now. It might
Mhm.
have a fashion again. It will come back. So I think that's part of it. But I do also have one of my chaps is called Mark, and I think Mark is a really solid name.
Yeah,
Just a solid
exactly.
name. Everyone knows a Mark that they can depend on. Marks are rarely, you know, they,
Yeah.
they rarely do anything dreadful. They're rarely sort of stepping out of the bounds of the norms. The other husband is called Dan, but Dan spelled differently because he's actually
Mhm.
Dutch, and Dan with a double A, which means even on the page, it won't be quite the same in audio, but even on the page, he's a little bit exotic, a little bit unknown by having that double A. And I think those things are important to us. They're all signifiers. And I'm thrilled that you got it on that level.
Oh, I'm so glad it wasn't just me putting all my
No.
biases about names onto people. Good.
But indeed, if you had been, that would have been fine as well, because genuinely believe that the relationship between the reader and the words on the page, or the listener and the words they're listening to, is a really private dialogue, and you come at it with your own experiences. and
Mhm.
and whilst it's my book, it actually becomes your book very, very quickly. And so indeed, if you had come with it come with a lot of bias and prejudice, good for you, because that's being human.
Thank you. Um, One of the key themes in this book, and I think actually in a lot of your books, is how much do we really ever know the person we live with? And the one of the things that I love very early on in the book when the two women go missing is both husbands having that kind of moment of reckoning as they realize there are some just very obvious things that perhaps they should have known about their wives that they don't know.
Yes, yes, because again, no spoilers, but there are the things like, friends' telephone numbers. But
Yeah,
how many of our partners have our friends' telephone numbers? Because they're in our
absolutely.
phone.
Yeah.
I mean, in the days when you had an address book, maybe you could reach for them. But that sort of thing allows secrecy. I think technology
Mm.
and the world we currently live in does allow a certain level of secrecy. That said, the flip side to it is technology also means you can be extremely tracked, and you're quite often being photographed when you're unaware of it. You potential
Mm.
adulterers out there, be aware. Just saying. But for me, I think the great journey of life is really understanding ourselves and our loved ones, and really getting to know people. There's not much else to it. And whether that's some people like to travel and get to know endless strangers for fleeting moments, and
Yeah.
that satisfies them. Others like to stay put and devote themselves entirely to their partner and really just have an incredibly in-depth knowledge of that person. Most of us are somewhere in between on that spectrum. And so most of us will be surprised to find out that our partners quite often have secrets from us, and they do. I mean, they just do. I remember Jim and I, we had this pledge early doors saying, we'll never have any secrets. And I remember saying that as I went into the bathroom, and absolutely would not let him follow me in, because I was literally waxing parts I didn't want him to know I did. That is going to be a secret that goes to my grave. I would much happier tell my girlfriends, or in fact, I'm quite happy to tell the an audience of tens of thousands that I wax my mustache, but he's not finding that out. So, so yeah, I think we do have some very harmless small secrets from one another, but obviously there are, in some cases, huge, insidious, very difficult secrets that I suspect are very much deal breakers.
Mm. Just on that kind of, knowing people and that being kind of part of the journey of life to really get to know people. Do you think there is a bit of a gender aspect to that, though? There's a bit in the book where you say, well, actually, kind of had the luxury of not having to get to know people terribly well because they were middle class white men where everything was going right and it was all okay. So they didn't have to worry too much about anything.
Correct. I think it
Mm.
is. I don't even think it's necessarily a class thing,
Mhm.
and I'm probably going to get shot for this, but I do think there is a gender difference. I think women love, I mean, some men, but nearly all women love knowing about other people's lives. They love
True.
showing they care by remembering little details about one another's lives, and that we find each other fascinating, and we're always sort of we're very externally focused. It's an instinct to sort of know what else is going on in other people's worlds. Where I think, and it's a real generalization, but men are, if things seem on the surface pretty chirrupy, they'll go
Mhm.
with that. They're
Yeah.
unlikely to dig and sort of say, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I'm really not trying to offend anybody
Yeah.
or get anybody's backs up. I am just saying it's a bit of a truism, as the life I've found, that women tend to want to know what's going on in everybody else's head, and men are quite content to just work out what's going on in basically their stomachs or trousers or heads. But basically quite self-focused, put it that way.
Yeah, that's very funny. Um,
I'm going to get into so much
you're
trouble.
gonna get
All the
so
men
many
listening
letters.
to this, I'm going to get so many emails. Sorry, people. I'm apologizing in
I
advance for
love it. Love
my
it.
last century thinking.
Um, for anyone listening to this, and I think a lot of readers are dedicated Adele Parks fans, but also sometimes want to be Adele Parks themselves, want to be writers. What are some of the things that you have learned? Because happy 21st book birthday. This is the 21st book. What are some of the things you've learnt along the way in your writing career that you perhaps wish you'd known way back at the start?
Interesting. I've learned a lot. I don't know if I could have, if it would have helped knowing it all at the start, because it's a bit like when you try and give advice to your children, they look at you despairingly and you know they're going to have to go and make their own mistakes. I think one piece of advice is there will be mistakes along the way. You will make wrong calls. Other people will make wrong calls on your behalf. You will have disappointments. Don't worry about it. Push on. If you love your writing, the terrific things such as the chart positions and the best sellings and all of those lovely things, which I absolutely adore. I love selling books and I love making those connections and I love chart positions. So I'd be silly to pretend I don't. But actually, that's not what it's about. It's about the writing. So I think the biggest advice I would have given my old self, and I would give any new writers, anybody writing, write because it makes you, I'm not going to say happy because it might not make you happy. It might make you very discontent, but write because you feel challenged and interested, and because you can't not, and because you are tackling truths, and because you're excited by what you've written. And then if somebody doesn't quite get it, don't dismiss them. Listen to what they have to say, and perhaps what they have to say is important and improving. I always think that with my editing team, I think it's always incredibly good to remember they're on your team. They want you to write the best book. The suggestions they make are super positive. But on the other hand, don't feel you have to listen to every Tom, Dick, or Harry, because you will never please all the people all the time. And in fact, that is not the job of an author. So you have to do this really peculiar thing of developing a very thick skin so that you are not offended by absolutely every single quirk or review or person who doesn't like your book or doesn't even pick up your book but says to you, well, they're not my type of books. And at the same time, have this kind of very thin skin so that you can take on board other people's emotions, feelings, thoughts, experiences, and most authentically reflect them, because that is the job of the writer.
Beautiful. Final question then. What are you up to next?
Haha, I am, because of my plotting and planning process, currently 95,000 words into next year's novel.
Wow.
So, yeah, so there's definitely one coming, folks. Don't you worry about it. Hasn't got a title yet. Titles quite often come fairly late on for me, and quite often are suggested by my brilliant editor. I don't think I'm able to step away from my books far enough to be able to come up with the titles. But indeed, it is 95,000 words on. I'm having a pause from it right now because I'm sort of in promotional time and giving all my attention to both of you. But I can tell you it's a thriller. I can tell you it's even darker than the one you're
Ah.
currently listening to. Yes, I don't know what's wrong with me. But again, it has got twists and turns, but I think it is very focused on character development. I hope it is a character that you, while she is definitely an outlier and quite impossible to like on some levels, I very much hope this particular character holds your sympathy, and you want to get to know her and understand her. I think she's part of a much maligned part of society, and I'm sort of hoping to shine a bit of a light on her.
I can't
But I
wait.
can't tell you who she
Oh,
is
I'm
or what she does. But yes.
so excited. I cannot wait for it. Adele, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you as ever. Thank you so much for, well, not quite sitting down with me, but nearly sitting down with me to talk all about the amazing both of you. I absolutely loved it. And listeners, you are in for a treat.
Oh, thank you, Harriet. I can be more pleased to be chatting to you and more pleased to know that people are about to listen to my book. How exciting.